I woke up from an 11-day coma to a nurse asking me if I remembered signing the papers that transferred my apartment lease, my car title, and access to my checking account into my sister's name. My name is Odalise, and I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't been conscious to sign anything. And by the time I finished piecing together what had actually happened during those 11 missing days, I understood that my own sister had spent them building an entire replacement version of my life, one document at a time, while I lay in a hospital bed unable to stop her. This story does not slow down. Stay with me. Fast setup, because the pace only accelerates from here. I was 31. I worked as a paralegal at a mid-sized firm downtown, lived alone in a one-bedroom I loved, had a decent car, a modest but growing savings account, and a sister, Renee, 2 years older than me, who had spent most of our adult lives in a rotating cycle of financial crises, a failed business, a divorce with debt attached, 2 evictions I'd quietly helped cover the deposits for without ever telling our parents. I loved her. I want that on the record before anything else, because I think it matters to understanding how completely blindsided I was by what came next. 11 days before this story starts, I was hit by a car while crossing an intersection near my apartment, walking home from the grocery store. I don't remember the impact. I don't remember the ambulance. The next clear memory I have is waking up in a hospital bed, disoriented, a nurse leaning over me checking my vitals, saying something I initially couldn't process because my brain was still catching up to the fact that 11 days had simply vanished from my life. I want to walk you through the exact sequence of what I learned over the following 6 hours, because it did not arrive as one clean explanation. It arrived in pieces, each one worse than the last, delivered by different people who each seemed to know a fragment of a much larger picture I didn't yet have. The first piece came from the nurse herself, almost accidentally, while going over my discharge paperwork checklist. "I see your sister already picked up your personal effects and handled the apartment situation," she said, glancing at a form. "That's good. One less thing to worry about." "Handled the apartment situation," I repeated. "What apartment situation?" She looked mildly confused, checked her notes. "There's a note here that you two coordinated on transferring the lease since you'd be needing extended recovery care at her place. I don't have all the details. That would have gone through your caseworker." I lay there for a moment feeling something cold and wrong settle into my stomach, because I had never discussed transferring my lease to anyone, at any point, for any reason. I hadn't been conscious to discuss anything. I called Renee from the hospital phone, since my own cell was apparently among the personal effects she'd already handled. She picked up sounding bright, relieved, performing exactly the tone of a sister who'd been worried sick and was thrilled to hear my voice. "Oh my God, you're awake. I've been going out of my mind. How are you feeling, Renee? What happened with my apartment?" A small pause. Just barely perceptible, the kind you'd miss if you weren't already primed to notice it. "I just took care of some stuff while you were out. Don't worry about any of it right now. Focus on getting better." "What stuff?" "Just logistics. I'll explain everything when you're home. Let's not do this over the phone." I want you to sit with that phrase for a second, because it's going to come up again and again throughout this story, in almost identical form, from almost everyone I asked a direct question to over the following week. Let's not do this over the phone. I've come to understand it as one of the most reliable warning signs a person can give you. The specific, deliberate postponement of an explanation that should, by any reasonable standard, take about 15 seconds to give honestly. I was discharged 2 days later, weaker than I'd ever been in my life, and instead of going home to my own apartment, I went, out of pure practical necessity. I genuinely had nowhere else to go, since apparently I no longer had a lease, to Renee's place. What I found there, over the following 72 hours, unraveled faster and more completely than anything I had braced myself for. My apartment lease, it turned out, had in fact been transferred, not coordinated on, as the nurse's note had generously described it, but formally, legally reassigned into Renee's name, using a power of attorney document that listed her as my emergency decision-maker, a document I had never signed, never seen, and, as I would later confirm with an actual lawyer, never legally existed prior to my hospitalization at all. It had, somehow, been produced and submitted to my landlord 4 days into my coma, notarized, with a signature on it that was, and this is the detail that made my hands go cold when I first saw the copy, a reasonably close, but ultimately, on close inspection, clearly forged version of my own. My car, parked in the hospital's overnight lot the night of the accident, had been picked up 2 days into my coma. Not towed to storage, not left for me to retrieve once I recovered. Picked up, driven away, and I discovered this on day 4 of my post-discharge investigation. Cross-referencing DMV records a very patient clerk helped me access, retitled into Renee's name 5 days into my coma. using the same notarized power of attorney document. My checking account, the one I'd built up over 6 years of careful, unglamorous saving, had seen 4 withdrawals during my 11 unconscious days, totaling just under $8,000, executed using my debit card at ATMs I have never once in my life used, in a part of the city I have no personal or professional reason to have ever visited. I want to describe the specific vertigo of sitting in Renee's own guest bedroom, recovering from a coma in the home of the person who had, it was becoming inescapably clear, spent that exact recovery window systematically dismantling and reassembling my entire material life around herself. Piecing this together on a borrowed laptop, because my own phone and computer had, of course, also been among the personal effects she'd taken possession of and had not yet returned. I confronted her on day 5. I want to tell you it was a calm, measured conversation, but it wasn't. I laid the printed DMV record and the bank statement on her kitchen table and asked her, directly, how a power of attorney document with my signature on it existed when I had never signed one in my entire life. She didn't deny it immediately, which somehow made it worse than if she had, because it meant she'd apparently already accepted, on some level, that this moment was coming and had a version of an explanation prepared. I was going to lose everything, she said. The eviction was days away, actually days, Odalise, and you were unconscious, and the doctors weren't even sure you were going to wake up at all in those first few days, and I panicked, and I thought if the worst happened, at least this way things wouldn't just sit in some legal limbo for months while everything got seized or auctioned off. I was protecting it. Protecting it, I said, by moving it into your name, not into some estate account, into your name, specifically, permanently, using a forged document. She didn't have a good answer for that, because there isn't one. Over the following hour, in pieces, she admitted the fuller shape of it. The eviction notice she'd been dodging for 3 weeks prior to my accident had, in fact, become final the same week I was hospitalized, and rather than ask me for help the way she'd asked before, she had. And I want to be precise about the timeline here because it's the detail that changed how I understood this entire thing. Begun looking into what would legally happen to my assets, if the worst happened, the very first night I was in the ICU, while doctors were still running tests to determine whether I would regain consciousness at all. She had, in other words, started planning how to absorb my life into hers before she had any way of knowing whether I would survive to object to it. I found the notary 2 days later, a small strip mall office I tracked down through the document's own header. The notary, an older woman who looked genuinely uneasy the moment I introduced myself and explained why I was there, told me, carefully, clearly worried about her own liability, that a woman matching Renee's description had come in 8 days into my coma with a document already fully drafted, along with what she described as a woman she introduced as her sister, present in person, who signed the paperwork. I stood in that strip mall notary office and asked the question I already, sickeningly, suspected the answer to. Was I unconscious the entire time, or was I actually there, awake, signing this? The notary looked deeply uncomfortable. She said you were recovering well, sitting up, alert. I had no reason to think otherwise. I checked ID, it matched the name on the document. Which meant, as I pieced together over the following 2 days with the help of an actual attorney, I hired the moment I had access to enough of my own money to afford one, that Renee had brought someone else, a friend, a coworker, someone I never fully identified despite trying, into that notary's office, presented her as me, using an ID that, upon closer examination once my attorney requested the notary's file copy, was a photocopy convincing enough to pass a quick glance, but not, under any real scrutiny, an image of my actual face. I want to tell you what happened next, because the story does not slow down here either. I filed a police report. I want to be honest that this was, without question, one of the hardest single decisions of my entire life. Filing a criminal fraud and identity theft report against my own sister, the same sister I'd covered 2 evictions for, the same sister who used to walk me to school every single morning when we were kids because our parents both worked early shifts. But the alternative was accepting a version of reality where the 11 most vulnerable days of my life had been used, deliberately and with real planning, to legally erase me from my own possessions, and I could not accept that, no matter who had done it. The investigation moved faster than I expected, mostly because the forged ID and the fraudulent notarization gave investigators a genuinely clean paper trail to follow. Renee was charged, eventually, with identity theft and forgery, charges that, as of the time I'm telling you this, are still working their way through the court system. I want to tell you about the part of this that still, months later, catches me off guard in quiet moments, because it's not the theft itself, it's what I learned, almost as an aside, from our mother, About 3 weeks into the whole ordeal, sitting in her kitchen the way I imagine everyone in these stories inevitably ends up sitting in someone's kitchen at some point. Renee, it turned out, had asked our mother, for days into my coma, whether she thought I would actually want to come back to that apartment if I woke up, or whether it might honestly be easier for everyone if things were already sorted out by the time I recovered, framing the entire operation, even to our own mother, as a kindness she was doing me, a burden she was lifting, rather than what it actually was, which was an 11-day window she'd identified and used with real methodical intention. Our mother, to her credit, told her at the time that it sounded like a terrible idea and to wait until I woke up. Renee did not wait. I got my apartment lease reversed within 6 weeks, once the fraud was formally documented, though I never moved back into that specific unit. I couldn't shake the strange, specific discomfort of living somewhere that had, for a stretch of days I have no memory of, technically belonged to someone else, under my forged signature. My car was returned, though not before Renee had put nearly 3,000 miles on it. The $8,000 from my checking account has been partially recovered through the ongoing legal process. I'm told the rest may come back once the case fully resolves, though I've stopped counting on it emotionally, if not financially. I moved into a new place entirely, in a different part of the city, about 2 months after I woke up. I started therapy almost immediately, faster than I think I would have for most other kinds of betrayal, mostly because the specific violation of this one, losing 11 days of consciousness and returning to find your own material life, had been reassembled without you, using your own unconscious, vulnerable body as the exact window of opportunity, left me with a kind of disorientation that I genuinely did not know how to sit with alone. My therapist has helped me understand that what happened to me wasn't a failure of caution on my part. There is no reasonable level of vigilance a person can maintain while unconscious in an ICU. The violation here wasn't something I could have prevented by being smarter or more careful. It required someone I trusted completely to actively, deliberately exploit the one period of my life when I had zero capacity to protect myself at all. I think, more than anything, about that first conversation with the nurse, the offhand, almost cheerful way she mentioned my sister had handled the apartment situation, a detail that could so easily have slipped past me if I'd been slightly more disoriented, slightly less inclined to ask a follow-up question, slightly more willing to just accept the reassurance at face value and sort out the details later, the way you might reasonably want to when you've just woken up from 11 days of unconsciousness and every instinct in your body is telling you to rest rather than interrogate. I think about how close the whole scheme came to simply working permanently if I'd been a little more exhausted, a little less suspicious in that first conversation. It's been about 7 months now. My mother said something to me a few weeks after everything came fully into the light that I still think about often, sitting at her own kitchen table, the same table where she'd once told Renee to wait and been ignored. She said, "You didn't lose 11 days, Odalise. You lost a version of your sister you'd already been slowly losing for years, long before the accident. This just finally made it impossible to keep pretending otherwise." I didn't fully believe her at the time. I believe her more now, with enough distance to actually see the shape of who Renee had apparently already become, long before an 11-day coma simply gave her the opportunity to show it fully. If you've ever woken up, literally, or in some other, more figurative sense, to find that someone you trusted had used a moment of your own vulnerability to quietly rebuild your life around themselves, I want to hear about it. I think there's something uniquely disorienting about betrayals that happen while you're unable to witness them happening in real time, and something strange and important about the specific work of piecing together, after the fact, exactly how much was taken while you weren't able to watch it go. 11 days. One forged signature. That's all it took for someone I trusted completely to try to become me.